Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about the feudal system. In Europe, during the Middle Ages, the feudal system was the main way to rule a country. In this lesson, we are going to address the following subjects. First, we are going to look at the time before the feudal system. Secondly, we will continue with the real feudal system. And in the end, we will look at some advantages and disadvantages. First, let's start and have a look at the Roman Empire. The Romans had a huge empire. They were able to rule and control all the regions thanks to good roads that allowed them to travel fast. And they also had capable governors who kept the provinces under their control. Think of Pontius Pilatus, who was governor of Judea, who sent Jesus to his death. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the land was divided by a lot of Germanic tribes. This meant that the roads were not maintained anymore and decayed. After a few decades, however, the Franks, one of the Germanic tribes, succeeded in reuniting a bigger region under one king. This king needed to travel around the country to collect taxes and to impose his power in all regions. But due to the bad state of the roads, it was very difficult to travel around as effectively as the Romans could. So, it was easy for regions to escape the rule of the king. Therefore, the king started to appoint vassals. Those vassals can be seen as a sort of minister. They received royal powers and were assigned a function. For example, a vassal could be in charge of the treasury, justice, or the military, and so on. Those vassals weren't paid in money or land. They did, however, get to stay at the royal court and received full sustenance. That means that they received food, clothing, horses, houses, and so on. Later the king sometimes gave them the income from a piece of land. In return, the king expected loyalty, counsel, and a good execution of the job. Therefore, the vassals would take an oath of loyalty. They could only swear loyalty to one king, and when the vassal died, the job was not handed down to their heir, but given to someone else. In the following centuries, this system evolved to feudalism. The countries kept expanding, but the king still had the same problem regarding the bad roads. This caused him to have slow and difficult access to the regions. This made it hard to impose their power, resulting in a lack of control. So the king starts to divide the country and lends big pieces of land to high nobility, such as barons, counts, and earls. Those noblemen had to rule these pieces of land in the name of the king. The difference with the former system is that the vassals were not sustained by the king anymore, but by their own lands loaned from the king. Nor did they stay at the royal court. Those pieces of land we call a feud, which is connected to the word feudalism, or more commonly used, a fief, and in het Nederlands een leen. The king is the liege or lord, in het Nederlands leenheer, and the nobleman who receives the fief is the tenant of leenman, but in English they kept the word vassal but let its meaning evolve. Very important though, the king lends the piece of land, so the vassal doesn't own it for eternity. This means that when the vassal dies, is not loyal, or fails to carry out his duties, the land goes back to the king. In addition to the land, the vassals received the power to rule and the protection of the king. When a fief was in danger, the king will come with an army and help the vassal. In return of these favors, the king demands loyalty, counsel, taxes, and military support. So when the king calls to arms, the vassal must deliver men and go and fight for the king. With the vassals now control their fiefs, all the king has to do is to travel around his country and keep his vassals close and under control. The vassals, however, started to do the same thing as a king. If their region was too big to rule, they would lend pieces of their fief to lower nobility, for example knights. These lower noblemen would in turn swear oath of loyalty to the higher nobility and become vassals of the higher nobility. that now, in turn, become lords. Most of the time, the same rules and agreements applied. This system was effective because a strong king could reign over a country without having to control every citizen himself, but it had also a lot of flaws. The king still had to travel around all the time to control his vassals. Because the vassals are now sustained by the land which they rule over, they have less loyalty towards the king, focusing more on their own power as opposed to when they were sustained by the king and lived at the royal court. A vassal could also swear loyalty to multiple lords in order to gain more land, which shows lack of personal loyalty, which in turn weakens the position of the king. This results in the fact that the vassals often wanted to keep the fief and give it to their oldest son so it stayed in the family. That means that the king either has to lose his fief or be in conflict with the vassals. Some fiefs became so powerful that weak kings lost all their influence and power in the region. If you look back at the lesson of the Battle of the Golden Spurs, this is exactly what happened. The Flemish earl, who was a vassal of the French king, had become very powerful and had passed the land down through his family for generations. The weak kings were afraid to do something about this growing power. But then, a stronger king decided to combat this loss of power by invading Flanders. But the Flemish people and the close vassals of the Flemish earl were so loyal to their lord, and thus not to the French king, that they decided to fight the French king, primarily to keep their independence.